Happy Easter season, people of God. It's good to be with you. What a joy it is to share in this service on this first Sunday in the Easter season from the Northeastern Iowa Synod staff. Along with some of our family members, we're pleased to be able to share this service with you. Personally, I've not had the opportunity to share leadership in a worship service with my three wonderful granddaughters who are a part of this service, leading us in prayer. So this is a very special day for this grandma too. I've been preaching on this John text that you heard read over many years, but this year is different. This year, when John wrote about the disciples being in a locked room out of fear, it registered as something I could relate to in a different way than any other years. Gathered in a locked room in fear, does that ring a bell for you as well? Sounds like quarantine to me. I spent a good portion of 2020 in a locked room of sorts. It was my own home. And I certainly felt fear, as I know many of you did, though not of being tortured for my faith, which is what the disciples maybe were fearing, but rather it was fear of an unseen enemy, a virus that has been deadly for so many. When I preached on this text before, I think I focused on how difficult it was for those disciples who knew Jesus best to believe in his resurrection. They're so much like us, striving to believe in that which we cannot put our hands on, like Thomas in this text. And that was then, and those are similarities, things we have in common with them. But today and now, after all this time of being in the grip of this pandemic, I heard this story differently. Now, I want to focus on where Jesus is and where Jesus is going and what he's doing and what he's seeing, how Jesus views this scene. It's more about Jesus and less about how tough it is to be a disciple, which is true. Northeast Iowa Synod has a companion synod relationship with the Lutheran Church of Hungary. Their president, Reverend Tomas Fabini, shared his Easter sermon with us via email, and in it he describes an old familiar Bible verse about Jesus standing at the door and knocking. The passage where Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." Only in this sermon, this President Fabini imagines Jesus being on the inside of the door, not on the outside step or porch, as has often been portrayed when we hear that text. That Jesus is on the inside, seeking to be out in the world, knocking to be let out, carried out, as it were, in the world. I thought it was a powerful turn on the image that is so familiar in my mind. And now it gave me a fresh insight and reminds me of my questions. Where is Jesus in this text in John? He isn't knocking, is he? He hasn't stopped to be knocking at a door or ringing a doorbell in our world. He's coming right through the walls. He's entering into the space as the resurrected Lord and letting himself be seen and fed and touched as he ministers to his disciples, to those earliest believers and witnesses to the resurrection. We may have felt that we left Jesus behind when we closed our churches a year ago and went into lockdown due to this pandemic. How we longed to be back inside, longed to feel and see and smell all that was familiar about our churches. But we were locked away in our homes, fortunately, but separated from our communities of faith, from our families. We were separated from perfect strangers. I remember watching worship on my computer in my home in those early weeks a little over a year ago, when we were all kind of just trying to get used to this quarantine stuff. I was very grateful to see the inside of my church, grateful to see my pastors' faces on the screen, but I also wept at being separated, at being so alone, at being fearful of what all of this really meant. Time after time, however, as I look back, and even somewhat in the moment, I understood how Jesus was managing to get through my screen and my walls in my heart or of my home, and of how Jesus was helping make himself known to me, was being present to me, bringing comfort to me. I'm pretty sure that was true for a lot of you as well. Jesus got out of church. Jesus came to hearts as people sought him through virtual means. Jesus got out of church and came to hospitals and nursing homes and police stations and family tables and waving hands in car parades and in so many other places and through so many other people and means. Jesus was and is risen from the dead. No walls, no buildings, no sacred traditions, as important as they have been and continue to be, no illness, no suffering will keep Jesus from God's people, from us, from the world. Jesus is knocking at the door of our churches, as many have resumed in-person worship, knocking from the inside, knocking at the end of those carefully distanced, masked gatherings, knocking at that door to be opened, that we may carry him forth in our communities and our homes, in our world, God's work, our hands, our bringing the resurrected one into those spaces and places that we find ourselves. We have learned again and again in this unusual year about how Jesus finds us wherever we are, how Jesus appears in the masked faces of neighbors just checking to see how you're doing, in the chalk drawings on driveways, in the way our spirits are lifted by such small gestures and kindnesses, in shared meals that are safely given to help us feel more part of a community, though we only see each other through Zoom meetings so often, and through things like these little hands on this piece of yarn that were traced by my youngest granddaughter and sent to me with the message that, Grandma, you could wrap yourself in this and feel hugged by us. So my three granddaughters, who you saw in this service, and their parents came up with a way to give Grandma a hug during the quarantine. And as you can see, I still use it from time to time. These little hands made this hug possible and brought that love of Christ in gestures small and simple to someone who needed to feel the closeness of Christian community. Not unlike the disciples in that locked away room, not unlike Thomas, who just demanded that there be something tangible in this experience of a resurrected Christ. How truly we have learned this year that tangibility piece, the desire to be close and know God's love in those hugs and touches and gestures. If ever there were a year in our lifetimes when we could deeply identify with this Easter season text about believers being locked away and being fearful, well, this has been that year. Here's a part of our story that is recorded in the Bible, part of our lives that is captured by the experience of first century disciples. Jesus came to us in our separateness, in our fearfulness, in our doubt, just as he came in John's gospel to tired and frightened disciples. Wherever you are viewing this video and participating in this worship service, whether in your home watching on that same device as always through the past year, or whether you're in your church behind your mask and distanced from others, know this: Jesus Christ is here. The risen Christ is coming to you inside or outside the building of our church, because the church is not a building. It's the people of God in faith who go forward proclaiming, he is risen indeed. He is present. Jesus is here for you, for all of us, for each of us. Be we fearful, tearful, full of vaccine or still waiting? Be we lonely or surrounded, or both? Be we suffering or hanging on by a thread, or bored? Christ is present, bringing new life and new hope and new possibilities to a world so desperately in need of having doors and windows opened, of having our hearts quicken and our eyes pop. Jesus is in the room, in our homes, in our churches, in our towns, in our world, in our hearts, resurrected. And as the text ends, remember this, people of God. Now Jesus did many other signs, John writes, in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Let us go forth in peace, the resurrected Christ with us.